Hey everybody, how you doing?
See, you're feeling better already.
Thank you, I am. Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. If this is your first time here, hello. Thank you for joining us. If this is your second or third or golly gee, even fourth or more time back, you are the wind beneath my wings. My name is Mike Lucht. I'm the host of this show, this podcast. It's called Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Every episode is potentially someone's first episode, and once again, if this is your first episode, welcome. This is a show where we like to basically explore various subjects, usually people, usually biographies, but every so often I'll find a crazy topic that I just gotta cover, gotta get into, and this is one of those. Normally I have co-hosts, but our schedules don't always line up, so once again, no Tom Slick Part 2, but we'll get there. I may just do part 2 by myself, and just whenever we can get together, we'll have a new subject. But today's subject is something I've been studying for a while now. It's something I've wanted to cover for a while, and I'm not going to lie, this is one of the first things I've extensively studied that has kind of creeped me out. Today we're talking about supernatural child abductions. We're going to cover a wide range of things, UFOs, folklore, fairy tales. We're going to go to Japan. We're going to go to Europe, all over Europe, the Nordic and the Celtic parts specifically. Off the top, I want to say that this is also unofficially part of a intermittent continuing series that'll be in and out called Our Ultra Terrestrial Overlords. But yeah, we're going to talk about supernatural child abductions, the missing 411, kamikakushi, and I also want to put some other caveats at the top here. My sources for this are the books Thieves in the Night, A Brief History of Supernatural Child Abduction by Joshua Cutchin, awesome book, as well as the article, or I guess academic paper, Supernatural Abductions in Japanese Folklore by Carmen Blacker, as well as a few other miscellaneous online sources. I'd also like to say before I begin, Joshua Cutchin's book gets into some certain topics that are hot button issues. So at the top, I'd like to say that going forward, any theories or speculation based upon children's developmental states are strictly those of the various authors I've researched, specifically Joshua Cutchin, for this episode, as I essentially know nothing regarding the subject, and thus either wouldn't feel comfortable or that it's my place to comment upon the matter, nor do I hold anything resembling a valid opinion on such topics. I know when to keep my mouth shut. When I don't know anything, I don't pretend that I do. However, it should also be stated for the record that a great deal of both the history and folklore regarding such things as changelings and fairies and elves, etc., does relate to the historical records of people's early perceptions, reactions, and interactions with children's developmental states, and I highly advise those who are intrigued or interested in further exploring this topic to check out Joshua Cutchin's book, Thieves in the Night. The man himself is an awesome writer. Everything he's done is great that I've read so far. I've got a couple of his other books I've been waiting to get into, but this one has captured my attention for quite some time now. So, as just a quick bullet points of kind of the themes and ideas and concepts we're going to get into, Shintoism, kami, animism, genius loci, genius loci, cryptids, the woods, Sylvan Dread, missing 411, and as sort of ideas to keep in the back of your mind throughout all this stuff like ley lines or dragon lines, geomancy, earth energies and mysteries, burial mounds, liminal spaces, megalithic structures, vile vortices, and ritual landscapes. But the main idea to keep at the forefront of your head is that every culture has its tales of unseen and invisible races that live next to us or amongst us or on top of us. Depends on how your own temporal spatio reasoning plots out wherever extra dimensional entities would live. So they're either right next to us or on top of us or inside of us. Ooh, that's weird. Other than Earth's oceans and polar regions, the collective conceptual liminal landscape that we refer to as the woods or the forest or the jungle or nature, or perhaps most accurately and for the sake of ease, the wild, stands as a final unexplored territories which to this very day remain zones of the unknown, untouched, utterly primordial parts of our planet that can instill an almost instantaneous and instinctual sense of panic in someone. And panic is a word whose root is entirely derived from one of the much more beastly deities of the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon, a god whose specific domain was, and very much still is, deep in the darkest areas of the wild, wild woods. And it is in keeping with these most ancient of animistic beliefs where there exist vast swaths of lawless, unpopulated creation that remains somewhat unfathomable to the minds of modern man, lands that encompass locations only inhabitable by either some uncatalogued fauna or, more likely, by strange eldritch nature spirits, once again the genius loci, elementals, or incomparably enigmatic entities, which are today often simply called cryptids. So in addition to the many mystical beings once thought to have regularly interacted or trafficked with our ancestors, this now also includes such peculiar figures as, if you want to get into the specific geographic locations, the Dark Watchers of Big Sur, and of course the infamous Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest, the fear-mongering Dogmen of Michigan and Wisconsin, the so-called Ghost Lights of Marfa, Texas, or the Brown Mountain Lights of North Carolina. Just two examples of the seemingly ubiquitous, numerous, ominous, luminous orbs that have potential to show up just about anywhere, really, these days. And then, of course, there's the Mothman and various other winged humanoids that range from West Virginia to Chicago, the Jersey Devil that allegedly stalks the Pine Barrens, the Goatmen of both Kentucky and Texas, as well as numerous nameless others yet to be discovered, just waiting to be witnessed. And just as untold generations amongst the Netherlands have always had their invisible cohabitants that since long ago they've called the Huldefolk, it seems that almost any and everywhere you may roam across this vast earth of ours, that in actuality, it all falls within the forever fully unknown territories secretly governed by our ultra-terrestrial overlords. Although, in my own most humble of personal opinions, I must insist that these beings seem predominantly benevolent-ish, if, in fact, they do have the capabilities to so easily interfere with our minds and our lives, yet decline to do so 24/7 in any lethal capacity. So, I mean, we've gotten along with them this well all throughout human history, for the most part, it seems. But, of course, there are always a few exceptions to the rule. In fact, sometimes relations with these others, you're going to hear me say it a lot, the others, because, I don't know, I'm very much of the Jean-Kiel Jacques Vallée ultra-terrestrial super spectrum thought process that this is something that's been with humanity for a long time. But, like I said, we've gotten along with them this well thus far, but there are always bad apples in the bunch. So, on the flip side of that, sometimes relations with the other can be so positive that they get downright all saucy, hot, and bothered. Case in point, This following excerpt from the book mimics The Others Among Us, edited by Tim Swartz. A woman by the name of Hallgerder Hallgrimsdottir, a photographer from Reykjavik, Iceland, wrote in her book, Please Yourself, Yours Elf. See, you see what you did there? Please Yourself. Sex with Icelandic invisibles. That, quote, sex with humans is rather mundane compared to making love to an elf. Hallgerder claims many Icelanders have been lovers with elves in secret for centuries. Quote, elf sex is possibly the safest sex on earth. They don't carry sexually transmitted diseases, and you can't get pregnant or make an elverine pregnant unless you both want to, which is not unheard of. And yes, there are female elves, elverines, and they're, this is all in caps, hot, 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 even to girls. That reminds me, all elves are bisexual, but guys and girls not ready for same-sex action, don't worry, no elf will do anything you don't want to. They can sense your longings and not longings. Thanks, Hallgerder Hallgrimsdottir. Boy, straight out of Valhalla, that one. According to a 2007 study by the University of Iceland, an estimated 62% of the nation believes that the existence of these beings is more than a fairy tale. However, this statistic covers both sincere believers and agnostics who lean towards the quote-unquote why not end of the spectrum. Whether one is a believer or not, it matters little to the quote-unquote others. They obviously have their own agenda when it comes to interacting with humankind. At times, they may look and act like us, but if you ever suspect that you are in the company of one, be careful not to look too deeply into its eyes. If you do, you may find yourself forever entwined in its delicious embrace. Unquote. Yeah, that's not my style of talking. So hard to tell where Hallgrimsdottir and Tim Swartz begin or end, but there you have it. So, anyways, while somewhat implied or inherent or intrinsic to today's subject, the overall topic of sexual relations with these quote-unquote others will have to be the specific focus of another future episode. Actually, probably more like episodes, as there is quite a lot to unpack there. More to look forward to in what will likely be an intermittent, like I said, intermittent continuing series under the working title of Our Ultra-Terrestrial Overlords. The most well-known associated phenomena often experienced in addition to encounters with these entities usually tends to include memory loss, missing time, being found or awakening in unusual locations, oftentimes without your clothes on, or maybe the underlying cause of such high strangeness byproducts like the Oz effect, where you all of a sudden just notice that everything has gone still and silent, or the hitchhiker effect, which has been reported by people who studied at Skinwalker Ranch. They go to the ranch, they leave, and somehow the phenomenon to some degree or another follows them home. Time-space slips, plasma activity, government cover-ups, poltergeist phenomena, psychic events, synchronicities, altered states of consciousness, dogs and cats living together, etc. And more often than not, it would seem that modern sightings and encounters tend to echo or adhere to older stories of shamanism, spirit quests, journeys into the quote-unquote other world, and or potentially any number of other various spiritual or religious experiences. That is, at least, events which could be interpreted as such, like Marian apparitions, what are they called? Guardian angel interactions. I don't know. Any kind of really just psychedelic experience that you could perceive as religious or of a spiritual nature. And so, if taken within the context of these particular parameters, it's also likely fair to assume that the vast majority of people on this planet, at some point or another in their lives, have either made contact with, or at the very least randomly and or unwittingly encountered or brushed up against or bumped into these so-called others. Go and marinate on that for a bit. Quote, Big Boy Outcast. Is it possible that all of these stories are talking about the same thing, just with different masks as perceived through our various cultural filters? While the exact worldwide numbers, I'm going to shift gears here real quick. While the exact worldwide number of people who disappear are never found, or people who disappear and are never found, is difficult to pinpoint, it's been estimated that around 2,400 people go missing daily around the world. However, most missing person cases are resolved with a small percentage remaining missing long term. For example, in the US, while hundreds of thousands of people are reported missing each year, a large portion of that are found quickly. If I'm remembering the statistics from our Saturn Death Cult episode back in the day, I believe it's roughly 98% within the US are found almost immediately. Global estimates, now, while precise global statistics are hard to come by, reports suggest that a significant number of people go missing daily. In the U.S., the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, reported 521,705 missing person cases in 2021. In India, statistics show up to 88 people go missing per hour. This translates to 2,130 people per day and 64,851 per month. In the UK, approximately 180,000 people go missing annually, according to World Population Review, with high-profile cases like the disappeared in Northern Ireland, where people have gone missing during conflicts and their bodies were never found, according to the BBC News. There's factors that influence these disappearances, like the aforementioned war, that's a big one, violence, organized crime, and as far as organized crime goes, use your imagination. It filters down and trickles down to much worse from there. It's important to note that the vast majority of missing person cases are resolved, with many people being found within a short period. A small percentage of missing persons remain missing long term, and their cases remain open, sometimes for years. Now, some disappearances are solved, many aren't, and some leave more questions than answers. Now, to jump right in to the potentially supernatural aspects, I want to run by a few examples of unexplained, possibly supernatural disappearances in Japan, which for centuries now have largely been referred to as kamikakushi, which translates, I hope I'm saying that right, kamikakushi, which translates into English as being quote-unquote hidden by the gods, probably more popularly known as being spirited away. For example, we've got the psychic spot disappearance in 1996. On May 5th, 1996, two 19-year-old women, Megumi Yoshiki and Narumi Takumi, embarked on a kimodameshi, a ritual ordeal, a rite of passage, and or test of courage, if you will. Usually something done in the summertime when the kids are out of school, I believe. I think that's how it works over there as well. But they headed up to an abandoned Subono Spa Hotel in Uozo City of Toyama Prefecture, a location rumored to be haunted. They were never seen again. In March 2020, their car and remains were discovered submerged in a nearby body of water. Despite the discovery, the circumstances of their disappearance remains unexplained, with some attributing it to supernatural causes. Then we got the case of Yuki Onishi, who in 2005, this 5-year-old girl mysteriously vanished in the middle of the forest during a holiday gathering with roughly 60 others in attendance. Eventually, 3,000 people would join in on the search, but to no avail. Reports claim that when a tracking dog was brought out to find her, it was said to have followed her scent into the woods up to the point where her scent trail just vanished. Thinking maybe that the dog was defective, the next day 4 more were brought out. They all led up to the one same specific spot and stopped. The trail just vanished, as if she were plucked up into the sky. Plucked up into the sky. Make a mental note of that. Then you got the Tohoku farmers encounter. dates unknown on this one, but a Reddit user recounted a story from their time living with their grandmother in a small town in the Tohoku region. A local farmer known for his drinking, not his farming, his drinking, disappeared for several days. Upon his return, he was a different man. He abstained from alcohol, he sought an exorcist for his property, and became intensely emotionally unstable. He confided that he had seen a figure in the woods wearing a white kimono with a veiled face. He followed it, but couldn't recall what transpired after he'd made contact with it, only that it was profoundly disturbing. Then you got the case of Shinya Matsuoka. This one's rough. Shinya was a 4-year-old boy from Tokushima Prefecture who in 1989 somehow vanished completely within a mere 20 seconds. The 20 seconds that his father didn't have eyes on him. He was right behind his father at the front door of their home on the mountainside when he disappeared without a trace. Shinya is believed to have been abducted, but no other people have been seen in the area during that same approximate time frame. So, of course, without finding Shinya, there is no resolution to this mystery. There's also the case of Minami Shimomura. There's a vanishing at summer camp in 2009, July of 2009. 10-year-old Minami Shimomura was a cheerful girl with Down syndrome who attended a summer camp in the woods of Gifu Prefecture. During the camp, she vanished without a trace, and despite extensive searches, no clues were ever found. The suddenness and the lack of evidence led some to liken her disappearance to a modern-day version of a kamikakushi. Then you've got the Tengu abduction in Nagano Prefecture, and remember that name, Tengu. It's a specific yokai. It's going to come up again and again while we're on our little sidetrack in Japan here. In Aida City, Nagano Prefecture, local folklore tells of children being spirited away by Tengu, supernatural beings or yokai. In one account, a child vanished for several days and upon return claimed to have been taken by a Tengu to Osaka. Such stories, while folkloric, continue to be shared in modern times, reflecting enduring beliefs in the phenomena of kamikakushi. Tengu abductions were, and to some degree still are, a major reoccurring theme in supernatural child abductions and have been for centuries in Japan. Just plucking children right off the ground and up into the sky. For those unfamiliar, Tengu are bird-like creatures capable of traversing mountains in minutes. So once again, seemingly as if these children are plucked out of the sky, just picked up, just like perhaps a UFO might do. I'm just making comparisons, just asking questions. Many times these children would be returned, but from that moment on were often, to quote the folklore, stricken with imbecility, and in some instances would return having their mouths full of rice, dirt, or in some of the stories, even feces. Yummy. Okay. There's also the girl who returned home in Nara Prefecture, in Goidu Village, Nara Prefecture. I believe this is in 2010. A 10-year-old girl disappeared while sleeping in her living room. The villagers searched extensively but found no trace. Mysteriously, though, she was later found sleeping in the same exact spot from which she vanished. This incident is also often cited as a modern-day example of a kamikakushi involving children. I also found during my research that one particular oddity of specifically Japanese disappearances, which seems to be a frequent trend and a disturbing one at that, is the occurrence of mysterious phone calls later placed to the families of missing individuals, not just children, grown folks as well. There's also the ever-increasing phenomena of the so-called evaporated people, who essentially just want to get the hell out of the rat race. Because it's just the culture in Japan. That they feel overworked, they feel trapped, they want to get the hell out of there. I can dig it. I understand. That's when you call up these folks called the night movers. No, not Bob Seger and his crew, but special fly-by-night businesses that can help an individual completely disappear overnight, essentially. Japan's evaporated people, quote unquote, had become a bit of an epidemic, and it made researching a lot of this a real pain in the ass. So, just let you know. Then, of course, there is the infamous missing 411 cases compiled by former police officer and detective David Paulides, which are deeply eerie and often aligned with kamikakushi-like elements, especially in cases involving children. Paulides specifically notes patterns such as sudden disappearances, impossible terrain traversal, missing time, and inexplicable recoveries, or lack thereof. Several particular examples involving children which mirror the supernatural disappearance tropes or motifs found in kamikakushi include Jared Adadero. This is in 1999, Colorado. He was 3 years old. Jared vanished while hiking with a church group in the Comanche Peak wilderness. He ran ahead briefly on a well-traveled trail and then was simply gone. Last anyone saw of him was a pair of fishermen, I believe, who assumed he was with the group ahead of him, but not so. Searchers found no initial tracks, sounds, or signs of a struggle. His clothing was later found neatly folded, miles uphill from where he vanished, far too steep for a child to traverse on their own. A few scattered bones and a tooth were found with no conclusive cause of death. They just know it wasn't an animal because animal attacks tend to be, well, you know it was an animal. The clothes appeared almost pristine despite the terrain and the time that had elapsed. And you've got the case of Dennis Martin, 1969, in the Great Smoky Mountains. Dennis was 6 years old. He was playing hide and seek with other children during a Father's Day outing. He stepped behind a bush and was never seen again. This is a fairly well-known case. Actually, most of these are fairly well-known, specifically in the realm of missing 411. For Dennis Martin, a massive search effort involving even Green Berets turned up to help look, and they found no trace of him. In fact, to this day, I believe there are still classified FBI files surrounding this case. Usually anytime a child goes missing, the FBI tends to get involved despite jurisdictional elements coming into play. A witness miles away reported seeing a quote-unquote bear-like creature carrying something over its shoulder around the same time that Dennis Martin disappeared. However, there was no scent trail that dogs could pick up. Bloodhounds and trackers found nothing. And then you've got the case of Dior Coons Jr., who in 2015, at age 2 in Idaho, vanished while camping with his family and some family friends at Timber Creek Campground. The adults claimed that they lost sight of him for just a few minutes. There's no physical evidence, no tracks, no clothing or remains ever found. Trained dogs found no scent trail, which is extremely rare. The site was remote but relatively open, raising questions about how he could have vanished so completely. I do believe his parents were implicated at some point. I'm not sure whatever happened with that. I mean, usually in cases like this, if you're an investigator, the family, the parents, the people closest to the missing are going to be the first ones you look at. So that's usually understandable. But yeah, nothing turned up with poor Dior. Then you got the case of Keith Parkins, age 2, who in 1952 in Oregon wandered away from his family's rural home and went missing in snowy weather. He was found 19 hours later, lying face down in snow, but alive. He was alive. He'd traveled over 12 miles of rough terrain, including fences and creeks, something no 2-year-old should be physically capable of. His clothes were removed in a way often seen in hypothermia. That would be paradoxical undressing. But the distance here is what's truly baffling. Then there's the case of Samuel Bolke, age 8, Crater Lake, Oregon in 2006. Samuel ran a short distance ahead of his father on a trail near Crater Lake and suddenly disappeared. Despite constant visibility, he vanished within seconds. Infrared-equipped helicopters and ground teams found nothing. Crater Lake has a long history of disappearances and Native American legends tied to spirits and quote-unquote cursed areas. Then there's the case of Alfred Beilhardt's 1938 Rocky Mountain National Park. At age 4, while hiking with his family, Alfred disappeared after rounding a bend in the trail just ahead of his parents. His body was never found. Days later, hikers reported seeing a boy matching Alfred's description high on a remote cliff miles away, and in an area that would be impossible for a small child to have reached alone. When the rescuers arrived, however, he was once again gone. Then there's the case of Jared Negrete, 1991, San Bernardino Mountains. This one's particularly creepy. 12 years old Jared vanished during a Boy Scout hike. Searchers only found his camera and a boot. The weird thing was that the camera had taken photos that seemed normal, except for the last image, which is a blurry close-up of Jared's own face, eyes wide and expression vacant. His body was never recovered, despite the intense, focused efforts of the search parties. Then you got the tale of Bobby Bishop, age 10, who in 1958 in Colorado vanished from a Catholic camp near Mount Meeker. Bobby was partially deaf. He was initially believed to have drowned, but his body was found a year later in a remote elevated location not consistent with the search theories. The area had been searched before, leading some to suspect he had been placed there post-mortem or vanished into some inaccessible terrain. The common threads through kamikakushi folklore and many of these cases are sudden, silent vanishings in natural or liminal spaces. High elevation changes or traversal of terrain far beyond the physical capacity of children this young, loss of memory or confusion in the rare cases that they return. And we're going to get into some adult cases too, especially in these rare cases where folks disappear and return, and what the limits of their memories of their time missing are. But continuing with the common threads, there's usually clothes removed or folded. This is often attributed to paradoxical undressing. I mentioned earlier, for those unfamiliar, if you are suffering hypothermia, your body starts to trick itself into thinking that it's warm, that it's too hot, so you start to remove clothing, and it expedites the process of hypothermia, essentially. There was no tracks, no scent trails, none that could be followed extensively or to any happy ending. Proximity to water and boulder fields and places traditionally associated with folkloric belief, I guess we could say portals, maybe, doorways, windows to other worlds, places with great spiritual significance, essentially. Now, as mentioned before, every culture throughout history has had some form of legend or folklore concerning a separate, unseen, non-human race or species which coexists right next to us. Within the parameters of this global monomythology are far more precise examinations of our various interactions with these beings, at least as far as our limited understanding and perceptions of such interactions can be ascertained. Perhaps one of the most familiar, widespread narratives occurring throughout global folklore would be that of fairies, spirits, demons, witches, jinn, etc., or what today we may perceive to be and or refer to as aliens. This folklore, once again, it's been around forever, it's in every culture, and as time and culture progress, they wear new masks. And unfortunately, one of the reoccurring instances, themes, occurrences in our interactions with these beings is the disappearance of children. They may actually be stealing children or infants and then leaving changelings or imposters, if you will, also sometimes called cambions, To be specific, a changeling would be a elf or fairy child, often full grown as an adult, but they have the physical appearance of a child and are left behind. And unfortunately, throughout history, this has been sort of a fallback explanation for various developmental disorders, physical ailments, etc. Basically, a reason to say the kid's no good and just kind of give up on it. Really, I mean, there's been worse. There's been worse ways to deal with it. That's for certain. And I'll try not to stray into that talk too much. But you've also got the folklore of cambions. This would include Merlin, the magician, from Arthurian lore. A cambion is basically the offspring of a demon and a human. So it's a half-blood or half-breed, a hybrid, if you will. This idea of the hybrid human with some non-human entities has been around for a long time. So they may actually be the direct offspring of such entities, interbreeding with human partners, and usually through deceptive means. If we're talking about folklore and history, there's the idea of glamours or shape-shifting, obviously comes into play even to today, thus becoming an inextricably interlinked archetypal idea of the demon lover, often called the incubus or the succubus. Virtually every culture has its own version of the boogeyman, and while it would be far beyond the scope of this particular episode to attempt outlining them all, the legends of paranormal child abductions from indigenous and folk traditions around the world often reflect disturbingly consistent patterns. But fear not, my beautiful kooks. Future episodes will delve further into the freaky sex lives of non-human entities, getting intimate with earthlings, as well as further elaboration upon the possibilities of quote-unquote secret bloodlines or dynasties, divine right, the heavenly mandate, quite possibly the existence of some form of occult eugenics existing throughout the hidden history of humanity. But let's take a quick sidestep to look at witches. That's right, Linda, witches. Even societies rich in fairy lore warned of other night-stalking figures, and none were more notorious than witches. Historically intertwined with fairies, witches stood out as terrifying distortions of maternal roles. Their portrayal as nurturers turned predators represented a deeply unsettling inversion of the expectations of femininity. Femininity, with children often in their crosshairs. Scotland's Yellow Myrteteach, I'm probably butchering this. There's going to be a lot of foreign boogie monster names, and I'm going to do my best to get them as well as I can. So Scotland has Yellow Myrteteach, a legendary tusk-toothed, one-eyed hag who's said to have birthed a race of giants. Race of giants. Sounds familiar. Like Lilith's brood, her children shared their mother's taste for infant abduction as well. According to lore, she delighted in stealing children to roast in her cave. Greek witches were feared for allegedly abducting newborns, either to drain their blood or torture them with needles. There's also the infamous Greek goblin Kallikensaros that lives in the subterranean caves of Greece. While some children were returned, they often suffered permanent injuries. Lord Solis, a 14th century Scottish noble linked to the spirit Redcap Sly, was believed to have sacrificed farm children at the ghost's behest, performing sinister rites in the Hermitage Castle. In 17th century France, several individuals, including Abby Guibourg and Catherine de Shays, were accused of hosting black masses in their cellars where children were allegedly offered to Satan. Even in modern times, the witch archetype has remained potent, quite potent. Between the 1970s to 1990s, and then again in the 2010s, when rumors of satanic cults and or Democrats kidnapping children for ritual abuse triggered what became known as the Satanic Panic in the US, UK, Australia, Africa, etc. While some isolated incidents stemmed from real crimes committed by ignorant teenage edgelords, scholars now see the movement was largely an episode of mass hysteria and or politically motivated character assassination and or psyops. See my last episode for that. It should also be noted that the tradition of the Witches' Sabbat, a black magic party, shares quite a few similarities with UFO lore. There's night flights, out-of-body experiences, quote-unquote witches' marks, and implant scars, or weird awakenings to, for lack of a better word, enslatherment in strange phosphorescent goo, being poked and prodded with metal instruments, etc., just to name a few. Historical accounts of child disappearances linked to the paranormal can be even more compelling. In 1943, Mary Scully, a 16-year-old invalid, vanished from her relative's home in Birmingham. Witnesses claimed they saw her walk with a veiled woman dressed entirely in black, and Mary was never seen again. In 1950, 7-year-old Adolfo Calboyahue, let me say that again. In 1950, 7-year-old Adolfo Calboyahue went missing while collecting firewood in Aleo, Chile. After 3 days of heavy rain and cold, he inexplicably reappeared on a dirt mound, dazed and silent. Later, he claimed, quote-unquote, strange men had taken him. His parents believed he'd been abducted by the mythical sorcerers of the cave. The Brujo. A belief strikingly similar to fairy lore, with its themes of missing time, altered consciousness, and return after 3 days. Across many cultures, the legendary witch's motive was not just kidnapping, but cannibalism. Unlike fairies, with exceptions like trolls or goblins, witches often crave literal consumption of children. Russia's infamous Baba Yaga and Japan's Yama-uba, both proud forests for wandering children. Baba Yaga, particularly chilling, was said to mimic parents' voices to lure kids close, only to stuff them in her sack for later cooking. Once again, this is a theme we see often repeated in modern-day cryptid lore. More commonly, witches were accused of stealing and sacrificing babies, especially those that hadn't been baptized. In some traditions, they were even said to sell these infants to the faeries, perhaps as a tribute in the quote-unquote "tain to hell," which in Scottish folklore is a tithe that the fae folk paid to hell via child sacrifices. Other accusations from Europe's grim history allege that witches used children's body parts in magical brews. Go listen to my old Peter Nears episode for more on that. One infamous recipe, aconite, belladonna, water parsley, cinquefoil, and baby fat. A witch could enhance her power by boiling a child, drinking part of the potion, and rubbing the rest on her skin. Such salves were believed to allow witches to fly to their sabbats. This also extends to Spanish and Mesoamerican horror stories about a specific form of bogeyman called sacramentecas, or sackman. Yeah, sackman. Or so-called fat extractors, but we'll return to more magical fetus recipes down the line. As with Changeling legends, real people often paid the price for folkloric hysteria. A birthmark, mole, or skin tag could be deemed a witch's mark, a place their demonic familiar would suckle for energy. This is big in Norway and the Scandinavian countries, echoing the idea that supernatural beings feed off human vitality. Entire communities could descend into madness from a single accusation. In fact, in Mora, Sweden in 1669, 2 decades before the Salem witch trials, 85 people were burned alive for allegedly bringing 300 children to witches' sabbats. This is why census takers are so important. Gotta have those population counts ready to roll. Those accused often faced brutal tests of quote-unquote innocence. Surviving them didn't always guarantee safety. Trauma alone could kill. Basically, it's the whole, if she floats, she's a witch. If she drowns, shit. I guess that ass should have learned magic. I don't know. But there are tales of child abduction folklore from around the world. In Africa, the continent holds a rich tapestry of supernatural lore, including beings that echo the fairy traditions of Europe. Among the Zulu, stories are told of the abattoir, tiny insect-sized hunter-gatherers who, while generally uninterested in humans, are known to occasionally whisk away children. Strangely, spotting one is still considered a sign of good luck for children. How about that? Pretty odd. The Yoruba of Nigeria and Benin, as well as the Igbo of southern Nigeria, speak of spirits known as Abiku or Ogbanje among the Igbo. Say that 3 times fast. These entities lurk in forests, along trails, and even in dung heaps. Pregnant women avoid these places, especially during sunrise, sunny afternoons, or moonless nights, fearing that an Abiku may follow them home and sneak into their womb, replacing their unborn baby with itself. So, there you have not only a horrifying aspect of this folklore, but something that mirrors the changeling lore of Europe. The Abiku are spiritual tricksters said to be born into the world after swearing to live only briefly, days, weeks, months, or in rare cases, into early adulthood. As the child's mysterious illnesses pile up, the desperate parents turn to a babalawo, a spiritual healer. These rituals may often offer a temporary reprieve, but eventually the child weakens again, revealing its true nature. The Abiku's endgame is to drain the family of its wealth before returning to its spirit realm, taking all that was sacrificed in its name. Once again, this mirrors European changeling folklore, except it's not necessarily just the family's wealth, it's all their food, everything on their farm, pretty much anything it can consume to continue living the high life, essentially, as far as these creatures are concerned. To stop the Abiku from coming back, parents may scar the child's corpse. The post-mortem injuries serve as a warning. Any Abiku who returns with these marks risks being rejected by its spectral kin. If it does reincarnate, the new child bears the marks of the previous body. Early anthropological accounts mention binding Abiku with iron rings. Once again, a parallel with European fairy folklore. They hate iron, as well as bells or even harsh herbs inserted into small cuts. These methods were believed to cause the spirit discomfort and force it to depart. Other African groups harbor their own eerie beliefs. The Dogon, the famous Dogon of Mali, sometimes abandon quote-unquote evil infants in the wild, leaving them to turn into serpents. The Nuer of Sudan and Ethiopia, upon recognizing physical deformities, might declare the child a disguised hippopotamus and consign it to the river. This is going to get dark in certain places, so just letting you know now. Especially when we get to those fetus recipes, good lord. Modern tales from Africa sometimes echo these old beliefs. In 1999, a 13-year-old named Kwame Afram vanished for 4 days and reappeared only after shamans intervened. He claimed that giants had taken him to a realm of goblins where he was made to do chores before being released. Then we head to South America, where European fairy lore, particularly about duendes, took firm root in South America following colonization. Originally Iberian in origin, these mischievous entities quickly spread across Latin America, bringing their penchant for stealing unbaptized infants and seducing young women. According to Nicaraguan folklore, they lure their victims with trinkets and soft, sultry whispers, sometimes never returning them. In Paraguay and parts of Argentina, children are warned to stay indoors during siestas or risk being spirited away by Yasi Yatere. This small whistling figure entices children into the woods where they later emerge mute and bewildered. Baptism is said to reverse this effect. Once again, you see the parallels of quote-unquote defective children and how people dealt with them back in the day. It's brutal stuff. A chilling creature from the Amazon known as a harakaka. Sorry, I'm a child myself, and caca makes me laugh. The harakaka preys not on children, but on nursing mothers. It silences the infant by placing its tail in the baby's mouth and then feasts on the mother's milk until the child dies of starvation. Though less about abduction, it reflects the same changeling-like theft of vitality. In Mexico and the Caribbean, there are legends of the Cheneques, mischievous dwarves that date back over 3,500 years to the Olmec civilization. These entities are still blamed for mysterious child disappearances, including the infamous case of one Arturo Gutierrez in the 1970s, who reappeared after a month claiming he had been playing with the Cheneques and living on milk and honey. Doesn't sound bad. Then you've got La Lechuza. Another feared Mexican legend takes the form of a massive owl with a crone's face. Said to be a witch seeking to replace her lost child, she mimics the cries of a baby to lure away the real ones. Ugh. Owls are going to be a reoccurring guest throughout this episode, and of course, much of the UFO abduction folklore. Owls, with their nocturnal habits and unique appearance, are frequently associated with mystery and the unknown. In some contexts, they are even suggested to be related to UFO encounters or even disguises directly used by extraterrestrial beings. This connection is explored more in books like The Messengers, Owl's Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee, and its sequel by author Mike Cleland. I also wanted to point out that oftentimes the Bohemian Grove idol is erroneously conflated with Moloch, but Moloch is a bull, not an owl. I see the child sacrifice folklore and mythology there. But yes, Moloch is a bull, not an owl. Always have to point that. And I don't know, if you take this idea of the owls being related to aliens and just what is going on with that idol in Bohemian Grove, I think this folklore adds a much stranger twist to it. I don't know. It's still there. In Jamaica, duppies, spirits of the dead, stalk women at night. Male duppies attack in their sleep, while female spirits lie in wait during childbirth to kidnap or kill newborns. Some Obeah practitioners, sorcerers, and witches are said to weaponize these spirits, inserting creatures like lizards or frogs into women's wombs. I'm cleaning that up. Use your imagination, folks, or don't. To cause supernatural pregnancies or miscarriages. In Trinidad and Tobago, the Duin, souls of unbaptized children, wander the land with backwards feet. You see this backwards feet thing in a lot of folklore, especially with cryptids and such. I don't know why, but it's very disturbing imagery to me. They mimic the names of living children to lure them into the woods. And you're going to see this mimicry and decoy act play out a lot as well. Similarly, the Ole Higwe is a vampiric witch from Guyana and Jamaica that sucks the blood of infants by night. Distractions like rice or asafoetida are left out to trap her into counting until sunrise, when she can be killed. Once again, another reoccurring theme with many of these, especially vampiric creatures. They seem to possess some sort of inadvertent obsessive compulsive disorder and have to count things. They play by the rules. Don't invite the head vampire in. That's all I'll say. Here in the U.S. and Canada, indigenous North American folklore contains many astonishing parallels to European fairy traditions. The Catawba of the Carolinas speak of the Yahasuri, which are underground dwelling beings who braid horses' manes. That's straight up one-for-one comparison with much of European elf and fairy folklore. And they also steal children. One abducted boy claimed they drained his blood but taught him to heal others. West of the Mississippi, multiple tribes, including the Paiute and the Quahia, tell of water babies. Oh my. Mysterious spirits that sound like infants crying near rivers. To answer the cries is to invite death. Sioux speak of the Mialuka, one-eyed, winged creatures that cause illness and vanish with children. In Labrador, the Innu tell of the Apsi Ilnik, mountain-dwelling beings known for snatching youngsters. The Nez Perce dread stick Indians who cry in the night and confuse those who hear them. A story from Mount Adams describes a baby who vanished from a car only to be found moments later dropped from the sky by unseen hands. Shit, I hope someone was there to catch it. Among the Shoshone, the Nanimbe are miniature tricksters who shoot invisible arrows that cause sickness. This sounds like something I've heard from UFO lore. In one story, they kidnapped a boy who later returned with inhuman strength. The Choctaw warn of the Nalusa Chito, a shadowy figure that rises from underground to snatch women and children. You're going to see another reoccurring theme of various encounters with these beings, especially undergone by children who survive the ordeal and are able to come back. They're often either gifted or cursed with strange abilities or shamanistic skills and practice. Once you've been touched by the other world, it continues to be drawn to you, essentially. There's the Iroquois, who speak of Otcon, a dark power that mates with human women to produce black-eyed, chalk-skinned infants. Heard those before. Black-eyed kids. Also, don't let them in if they ask to be invited. So unnatural, they are burned to prevent their resurrection. A lot of unfortunate things have happened to albino children, and still are today in certain parts of Africa. Yeah. Yikes. The Otcom can also possess wandering children, dragging them into trances. In Montana, beaver women... Get it out now, folks. All right. The beaver women were shapeshifters with beaver fur on their backs, and they sing near the water's edge to lure young girls. Boys, however, are drowned. Up in Alaska, tribes like the Kwakiutl and Chilkat Tlingit describe child-snatching giants who throw kids into baskets or slings. The Inuit tell of the Amayarsuik. Let me say that again. The Inuit tell of Amayarsuik, a massive woman who stuffs children into a hole in her back. Historical accounts match these tales. In fact, in 1915, hunters in Maine discovered a tiny village with an eerie stew. Inside was a dismembered child. The beings responsible, the Warnungmeksuark, claimed they rescued children from drowning only to eat them at an annual feast. A modern encounter occurred in 2008 when a boy was found wandering near Pilcher Mountain in Alaska. He had no sense of time, but remembered being taken underground by small beings, most likely the Ursinrat, a fairy-like people from the Yupik folklore known to trap the unwary. Even more disturbing are tales of the Cannibal Babe, a creature from the... I think I saw this on Cinemax one night. No. A creature from the plains that cries like a hungry child to lure in passers-by. Once close, it devours its victim down to the bone, often starting with a single finger. The Sioux tell of Two Faces, a grotesque giant with twin visages. A grotesque giant with twin faces and elephant-like ears. In one story, it abducted a child whose parents later rescued it, only to find the baby had been transformed into a twisted, mute creature with two sets of eyes. The infant soon perished. In a lot of this child abduction lore, especially in North America, there's also the reoccurring, and remember as well earlier we spoke of the Lechusa. You've also got big hoots and thunderbirds. These are another, and I find this an interesting parallel with the Japanese Tengu myths as well, seeing as the Tengu are the bird people. But in Native American folklore, many beings were said to snatch away unattended children. Among them were massive owls, which resemble the sinister creature of the Lechusa tales. The Apache warned misbehaving youngsters of the Big Owl Man, while in the Ho-Chunk or Hokak language, children are scolded with the phrase, "the owls will get you." These stories may have a basis in real avian biology. Some cryptozoologists have suggested that such tales may reference some long-lost, super elusive species of giant raptor or bird of prey. A researcher by the name of Mark A. Hall, who spent years compiling eyewitness accounts of abnormally large birds, coined the tongue-in-cheek term big hoots to describe enormous owls in homage to Bigfoot. Hall drew parallels between modern sightings and indigenous legends, particularly the Iroquois, Wyandot, and Tuscarora myths of flying, disembodied heads. I believe this is also paralleled in certain Japanese yokai myths and folklore. These entities, sometimes called flying big or great heads, were described as bearing razor-sharp talons, glowing eyes, and riding on storms. Fucking badass. Like the old world fairies, they were most active in fog, rain, and mist, and were feared for blighting crops and abducting children. Fire, as with many supernatural threats, was believed to be the only worthwhile defense. In a personal note, I recently, I would say about 2, 3 months back, may have had an encounter with a big hoot on my back porch. Now, while I didn't see this thing, whatever it was definitely making owl noises, and I could tell by the decibel levels and the way that the sound resonated in the hollows of my chest that this thing was fucking enormous, and it was right behind me. I did not turn around because I'm brave. No, I did not turn around because I didn't want to react to whatever it was, even if it was just a big ass owl. I did not want to react and cause it to react, and then everything just fucking fall to shit. But I swear I felt those hoots resonate through my entire body. It was fucking weird. This occurred with me already knowing most of the strange owl lore in connection to UFOs, etc. So I just was instantly like struck in my mind. It was like, oh shit. But yeah, that's probably one of the very few potential real life cryptid encounters I've had. Either way, I ain't fucking with no big ass owl either. So anywho, beyond owls, native legends also tell of the mighty thunderbirds. 150 proof? I don't know. These are towering supernatural birds often linked to lightning and storms, and they are known to hunt humans. These stories are astonishingly consistent across tribal traditions. In Washington, the Cathlamet spoke of girls being plucked into the sky. Plucked up into the sky. The Miwok of California warned that the child-taking Yelokin sometimes targeted teenagers. Don't blame them. I'm sure certain parents were raring for some of those birds to show up. A tale from Massachusetts recounts a hero chasing an immense bird to its nest in Nantucket, where that famous man is from. And there he discovered a horrific pile of children's bones. Even in modern times, the sightings of these mythical, folkloric giant birds of prey still persist. Cryptozoologists often cite the infamous Lawndale, Illinois incident from July 25th, 1977, when 10-year-old Marlon Lowe was reportedly lifted into the air by one of two massive blackbirds with stark white ringed necks and curved beaks. His mother's screams caused the creature to drop him right after a short flight. Other historical cases are equally chilling. There's the documented story of children snatched in West Virginia in 1895, Quebec in 1888, and New Mexico in 1892. Even frontiersman Daniel Boone allegedly saw a young native child carried off by a colossal bird. It's quite likely that should these things, had they truly existed, have probably all been hunted to extinction. If there are any left, they've probably wised up and stopped snatching kids. The aforementioned researcher Mark Hall collaborated with Pennsylvania historian Robert Lyman Sr., who recorded tales of the mysterious Black Forest region, a place known for both thunderbird sightings and for disturbing patterns of missing children dating back to the 1840s and continuing into the late 20th century. This theme of giant birds abducting children is not exclusive to North America. In South Africa, journalist Lawrence Green speculated in his book On Wings of Fire, published in 1967, that bearded vultures, also known as lammergeiers, might be capable of carrying off young ones. Maori tradition in New Zealand speaks of the te hokioi, a massive sky predator believed by some to be based on the now extinct Haast eagle. In the UK, countless taverns bear the name the Eagle and Child, often displaying imagery of an infant in a great bird's claws. Of course, you had the ancient Greek harpy. One of the most compelling reports came from Norway in 1932 when a gray sea eagle was said to have flown off with a 4-year-old by the name of Svanhild Hansen, carrying her over a mile to the Haga Mountain. Intriguingly, Thunderbird lore finds echoes in the aforementioned Japanese mythology, where once again we have the Tengu, a shape-shifting creature that can assume the form of a giant bird of prey and is known to abduct children. There are other striking parallels between Thunderbirds and Fae traditions. Both are storm spirits, both target berry pickers, and both are associated with otherworldly realms. Speaking of Tengu, let's circle back to Japan again. The belief that children might be secretly kidnapped by supernatural, malevolent forces during an unguarded moment is common worldwide. In Western Europe, fairies and korrigans are often blamed for abducting babies, replacing them with changelings, ugly, hungry infants with misshapen heads. This is actually where the word oaf comes from. Similarly, in Japan, a widespread belief persisted until relatively recently that if a boy or young man disappeared without explanation, he'd likely been taken by a god or a spirit. The previously mentioned kamikakushi, aka abduction by a god. In Shintoism, a god or spirit or elemental or, once again, genius loci, the spirit of a place, they're all fairly equal to each other as far as that particular belief system goes. If searches failed, the community would gather at sunset carrying lanterns and making noises with bells, drums, and shouting, demanding the child's return. Once again, bells are a reoccurring deterrent. Keep that in mind if you're worried about your children being abducted by supernatural forces. Iron and bells. And garlic. It's not just for vampires anymore. A little over a century ago in Japan, if these efforts did not bring the child back within a set time, the family might ask a miko or shrine priestess to perform protective spells. Should those also fail after 7 days, the child was considered lost forever. Yet many oral and written stories attest to these measures sometimes succeeding. Suddenly, the child would reappear, often in unusual, hard-to-reach places like temple eaves or between the ceiling and roof of their own home. After a few days of dazed recovery, the child might recount their experience, or sometimes they would be left mentally impaired and unable to remember. Sometimes these mental impairments that come along with these abductions when the child is returned, they can be quite temporary or they can be quite permanent. To attribute it to supernatural causes, there's probably a much easier way all throughout history of dealing with the realities of the difficulties that come with raising such a child in these times. Frequently, the child told of a tall stranger who would appear while they played and would carry them off. And then they would travel across mountains, seas, caves, or even as far as the Great Wall of China. In some stories, even the sun and the moon. Eventually, feeling lonely and homesick, the child would find themselves returned to the odd location where they were found. Such stories are found both orally across many villages and abundantly in Japanese literature since medieval times. Here are just a few examples from oral tradition. On September 30th, 1907, a child disappeared from a village in Aichi Prefecture while villagers prepared rice cakes for a festival. After a fruitless search, a sudden noise from the ceiling of the child's house revealed him unconscious with his mouth filled with rice cake. He told of being taken by a stranger who walked over treetops and into many homes with feasts of rice cakes before placing him in a narrow space, the ceiling of his own house. Sadly, the child became mentally impaired later. Near Kanazawa, in 1877, a young man vanished, leaving his sandals beneath a persimmon tree. After a search, a noise on the ceiling revealed him, his mouth stained green as if from leaves. He spoke of an old man who carried him on journeys to faraway, distant lands. And in the Kumano district, on the night of the 19th day of the 5th month in 1808, a boy disappeared after... That's how they wrote the date. I don't know. A boy disappeared after going out to the lavatory to do his business. He was found hours later on a rooftop with his hair cut and clothes tangled with cobwebs and grass. He proceeded to sleep for 3 days and then told how a mountain ascetic, aka a hermit, a monk, a Tengu, took him on a swift flight over sacred mountains before turning him home. If the child doesn't return within the allotted time, families look for signs providing a supernatural abduction rather than a simple disappearance. For example, in Shinshu province, the child's shoes neatly placed under a tree are a sign of supernatural abduction. Often the child will briefly reappear once more. One story from the Bungo province tells of a 5-year-old boy punished by being sent outside at night. His cries faded towards the mountain until he vanished. After 10 years, a man named Shoichi saw a large, fur-covered figure that spoke in a human voice, claiming to be the lost child. The figure gave him a chestnut cake before climbing away up a tree and vanishing forever. This is another fairly common reoccurring theme. You will see children that are abducted to essentially replace the numbers, replenish the numbers of these beings, as later, for lack of a better term, breeding stock. And we're going to get into some Bigfoot abductions down the road here as well. Women, too, could be victims of kamikakushi, sometimes reappearing mysteriously after an abduction. The types of supernatural abductors or kidnappers in these kamikakushi stories were generally known as Yama Otoko, or mountain men, which were tall, hairy, semi-humanoid beings often described by woodcutters, who were the equivalent of lumberjacks. So, seeing some parallels with Sasquatch over here. Covered sometimes with leaves or bark instead of fur, they'd kidnap children and women to become their wives. They do not take victims on magical journeys, but keep them captive in their mountain hidey holes. Extremely dangerous and hard to escape from. Then you've got the aforementioned Tengu, which are also often equated with goblins, oddly enough. These are mythical creatures with wings, a beak, like kite-like wings, and tiger claws, and glittering eyes, and they are renowned enemies of Buddhism. They're known for tempting and punishing Buddhist practitioners. They often disguise themselves as Yamabushi, or mountain ascetics. They'd kidnap boys or young men and take them on strange journeys to distant mountains. There's certain implications on some of these that I'm just not going to touch, by the way. Some of these tales could be used to explain some pretty horrific shit. Eventually, victims are restored home by a benign, mysterious old man. They're associated with causing mischief, including carrying off priests and children. And stories involving Tengu often appear in classical Japanese literature and temple archives. And then probably the oddest of all are the Shinto deities. These are the gods and spirits that weren't specifically monsters or boogeymen, but were out-and-out divinities that would run off with children. Sometimes they were local gods who would quote-unquote borrow children temporarily as mediums to receive offerings during festivals. Basically, a form of possession that causes the kid to wander off while he's being driven by a Shinto deity. There's other mysterious tall figures. Some stories tell of a terrifying tall man with terrible colored eyes who is distinct from a Yama Otoko or a Tengu. These kidnappers may keep abducted girls as wives and treat any children as not theirs, even killing or eating them. This figure is less clearly defined, but adds to the variety of abductor types. This also, once again, brings to mind the intentions of the girls from the Slender Man stabbing, who wish to first appease him with an act of ritual violence or murder, if not outright human sacrifice, but then essentially elope with him to live indefinitely in his so-called Slender Mansion Malibu dream house. The common themes that you'll see here are magical journeys, often described by abductees, as traveling over mountains, seas, or even to the sun and moon. Victims sometimes return mysteriously, often found unconscious or dazed in high, inaccessible places. Sounds like Missing 411 to a... I think we've seen that in Missing 411. Recovery often involves rituals, such as chanting Dharani or Buddhist spells, bells, drums, and the intervention of priests. Shoes placed under a tree indicate a supernatural theft, or the brief, mysterious disappearance of a lost child. Villages often respond by gathering with these bells and drums and chanting, "Bring him back," in hope of recovery. Boys often experience the magical journey and eventually return, while girls were usually kidnapped by Yama Otoko to be wives, with less chance of a return. It's a grim prospect. Kamikakushi is folk legends and not mere folk tales. Basically, unlike typical folk tales or mukashi banashi, which are set in an indefinite, once-upon-a-time fairy tale land and involve fantastical beings such as fox wives or monkey butlers? No. Monkey husbands? That's what we'll go with. Monkey husbands. With no claim to historical truth, but kamikakushi stories are presented as historical events. They are narrated with precise times, places, names, and the teller often insists on their truthfulness due to personal or familial connections. A friend of a friend of a friend, my cousin's baby's mama's accountant. This places kamikakushi in the category of folk legends, as these are persistent local stories believed as fact, comparable to modern-day urban legends or folklore like UFO sightings. Although, I'm hesitant to say folklore and UFO sightings in the same breath because, well, no, I guess it's apt. It works. Is there an objective basis for the belief in kamikakushi? Well, the folklorist Carmen Blacker, who wrote part of my source here, wonders why these legends are so widely and firmly believed. What real experiences or phenomena were the seed that actually occurred to cause these stories to spread? Much like every urban legend, there is some degree of truth. Actually, when you look at mythology and folklore, well, more mythology back in the day, like if we go to ancient Greece or Rome, specifically, this was not mythology to them. They were living it. This was happening. This was the real world. This wasn't just how to explain something. That's maybe how it started, but they 100% believed in these beings and interacted with them every day. They lived their lives as if this was all true. So it's not myth to them. They're living it. A clue lies in the dreamlike, inconsequential quality of many of these tales, suggesting the experiences might be linked to prophetic or visionary journeys common in shamanistic traditions and or the use of psychedelic drugs. Shaman! In many Asian cultures, shamans undertake spiritual journeys where their souls leave the body to explore other realms, the spirit world or the underworld below. These journeys are seen as initiatory rites, conferring supernatural knowledge and powers necessary for the shaman's role. Sometimes they are a rite of passage from childhood into adulthood. Early Japanese Shinto practices involved possession by gods or spirits rather than the shaman traveling out. This was also essentially what the oracles at Delphi and ancient Greece were doing. They were being possessed by spirits and gods in order to prophesy. And this still happens today in a lot of Buddhist practices. But the kamikakushi and many other, Buddhism is the one that sticks out in my mind the most though. But the kamikakushi experiences might be a remnant of an Altaic or Central Asian shamanistic tradition brought into Japan by ancient migrations where the spirit journey was performed by the shaman his or herself. Shaman! The Japanese population has some Altaic genetic cultural heritage from migrations around the 3rd, 4th century AD, and the kamikakushi stories might reflect an archaic cultural memory of these shamanic initiation rites. Shaman! That did become fully integrated into Japanese religious systems early on. Boys who experienced kamikakushi were often considered quote-unquote different or odd. sometimes neurotic or prone to trance states. These boys were sometimes selected to become Yoriwarawa, or child mediums who spoke for the gods, linking the experience to religious or spiritual possessions. Many survivors report vague or incoherent memories of their abductions and journeys, such as tall men with glittering mountain landscapes, strange lands and seas, once again, trips to the sun and the moon. I can only imagine how something like that goes down. Occasionally, some would give detailed, vivid descriptions, like a boy by the name of Torakichi in 1820, whose story became a significant source for scholars like Hirate Atsutane. These detailed narratives provided rare glimpses into the content of the other worlds, either as imagined or experienced during these flights of fancy, if you will. The much broader implications of all this suggest that these kamikakushi stories are not just spooky or mysterious folklore. They reflect complex intersections of history, psychology, cultural memory, religious experience, psychedelic experience, quite possibly. Most assuredly, at some point, I'm sure. These quote-unquote disappearances might symbolically represent shamanic initiations, trance states, or altered consciousness events that were historically interpreted as literal abductions or spirit journeys. And the persistence of these stories in a modern context shows how folklore evolves but retains deep roots in cultural identity and collective psychology, what Jung called the archetypes, the collective unconscious. And now back to the United States. One storyteller, by the name of Hiram Cranmer, Pennsylvania's Kettle Creek, claimed to know several people who had been taken by thunderbirds, including a girl abducted in 1937 while her family picked berries. Berries, for some reason, hold deep symbolic and folkloric significance. Some can be poison and borderline psychedelic. Some are just delicious and tasty. I love a mixed berry melange. My favorite fruit flavor. According to the Dane Za of British Columbia and Alberta, thunderbirds conceive beneath a sacred spruce tree that produces unique berries. So in a set of related tribal tales titled Thunderbird Steals the Wife of Another Bird, the victim, usually woodpecker's spouse, is often taken while gathering berries. In one version recorded in 1907, woodpecker's warriors transform into salmon berries to lure the women and reclaim them. They say, quote, "Our warriors," said he, "will change themselves into salmon berries as soon as they can reach the home of the thunderbird. These women, including the wife of the woodpecker, will come to pick the salmon berries, and the warriors will assume their proper shapes and carry the women away." The geographic links are also pretty fascinating. In the Appalachian Mountains, or Appalachian, mysterious treeless summits known as balds have long baffled scientists. The Cherokee lore explains them as deliberate deforestation efforts, fires set to eliminate thunderbird nesting grounds. Oddly, British folklore associates similar barren circles with fairies. Author Worthington G. Smith, writing in 1883, described these fairy circles as rings of bare soil surrounded by lush grass and fungi, and also operating as a liminal zone between our world and theirs. I often forget that the mushroom rings are so closely associated with the fairy lore as well, but it makes perfect sense. Now, I said earlier we'd be getting into some possible Sasquatch abductions, and this is where I deliver on that promise. No total overview on child snatching cryptids and supernatural child abductions would be complete without mentioning Sasquatch. The towering hair-covered hominid, said by some to be a surviving species of Gigantopithecus. Indigenous stories from across North America reference such beings as giant bipedal forest dwellers known to abduct women and children. In further incorporating the, let's say, alleged spiritual pedigree of Sasquatchi, well, Sasquatches. I want it to be Sasquatch, but it's not. Of Sasquatch, some have speculated that these are surviving members of the Nephilim race. Just saying. Just saying. There's a striking overlap between Sasquatch legends and witchcraft as well. Like witches, they haunt the woods and steal the lost. The Kwakiutl Tsankwa, a wild man of the woods, and the Lumis Chiini both throw children into large baskets. In Irish myth, the witch who tries to snatch an infant through the chimney is sometimes described as having a long, hairy arm, which evokes the Sasquatch silhouette and grooming habits. The names we use for these creatures also trace back to fairy lore. In the American South, and once again Appalachia, boogers, or woolly boogers, are regional names for Bigfoot. The term booger is not just a cool guy for Revenge of the Nerds movies, but it evolved from boogeyman, itself rooted in folkloric figures like boggarts and bugbears that were fairies and elves, or fairy and elf-like creatures who stole children. Even enormous owls, the big hoots, were dubbed booger owls in the Ozarks, further linking them to the child-snatching archetype. These connections suggest that Sasquatch may be something stranger than a mere undiscovered primate. This is where you get the most contentious splits between the Bigfoot believer crowd, whether they are a blood and guts ape or some form of supernatural being. I don't know. Myself, I'm on the fence. I mean, it's far easier to believe in a blood and guts ape, a monster of meat, than it is. I don't know. I don't even know what else it would be. But maybe the Sasquatch, as a monster of meat, as a man-made meat being, maybe within their cultural architecture, whatever you want to call it, the way their civilization and society is set up, maybe they too have the equivalent of a shaman or a sorcerer who has magic powers. So maybe some Bigfoots are magic, maybe some aren't. I don't know. They've displayed ritual behavior. They build things. They exchange gifts and take and leave behind gifts. So, speculation on my part. Indigenous cultures across the world share remarkably consistent stories of children vanishing in the unknown, and in the past, people feared changelings, duppies, fae, tengu, duendes, or pamirquetete. They worried about nursing an abiku or finding a spirit-snatched shell of their child left behind by the jinn. Today, we don't use those names anymore, though. Well, we do, but it's less often. Instead, today, we talk about aliens. So the monsters remain, but the faces have changed. I think that's the opening line to Strangers with Candy. How appropriate. So the persistence and transformation of changeling and abduction lore is easy to catalog. In the 1940s, Las Vegas, there was an urban legend of the Cenas, a couple longing for a child who find a mysterious infant with teeth and claws who frightens them away. This tale echoes the changeling myth where parents fear their children might be swapped for supernatural imposters. Similar sensational stories appeared even in modern media, like a 2005 Russian TV episode reporting bizarre simultaneous births and swapped babies with strange scars, weaving UFO lore into old changeling fears. Though likely hoaxes, these stories reveal deep-rooted parental anxieties that have persisted through centuries. The decline of fairy belief mirrors a theme common in Celtic tradition. Fairies are a fading race, slowly leaving the human world. Does any of this sound familiar with UFO lore? Historical shifts such as the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, and the rise of Christianity contributed to their disappearance. Yet, folklore and sightings linger in places like the British Isles, where belief in fairies remains part of everyday life. Ask John DeLorean. He can't, he's dead. He's dead because he didn't listen to the fairy warnings. As fairy tales waned, science fiction and UFO narratives rose around the turn of the 20th century. Perhaps fulfilling a similar cultural role. The popular ET hypothesis, or extraterrestrial hypothesis, the idea that aliens visit Earth in physical spacecraft, dominates most modern explanations for UFOs, but the phenomenon is much more complex. Alternative theories include faeries, time travelers, psychic manifestations, or tulpas, if you will, tulpoidal phenomenon, or secret human technology. And while many abductees describe encounters with non human entities and bizarre, invasive medical procedures, the evidence linking UFOs to abductions is rather inconsistent. Some abductions happen without any reported spacecraft, suggesting a more complicated phenomena, more largely in sync with phenomena such as sleep paralysis, bedroom invaders, global reports of alien abduction, or alien abduction-like events exist beyond the West, such as abductions by mysterious beings in Australia and Indonesia, indicating this is not purely a Western cultural construct. Researchers urge caution, however, both accepting and rejecting the extraterrestrial hypothesis outright limits understanding, especially since many reports include quote-unquote high strangeness, such as telepathy, psi effect, spiritual revelations, poltergeist phenomena, things that all defy scientific materialism. Hypnosis, I've made my beliefs on its use in this capacity and aspect known in the Dr. Carla Turner episode. I don't know. It's iffy. It's messy. Hypnosis is frequently used to recover lost memories of abductions, but is controversial due to the risks of suggestion and false memories. It's very easy for a doctor, quote-unquote doctor, or hypnotist to easily lead the patient just simply by saying, did they bring you into the craft? It just implies there was a craft. So things have to be very strategically worded, and the process has to be very, if this is possible, scientifically controlled. It takes a lot of work to get it right. It's frequently used hypnosis, that is, to cover lost memory or recover lost memories of abductions, amongst other things, but is controversial due to the risks of suggestion and false memories. Despite this, however, many case studies use hypnosis-derived accounts to study recurring motifs rather than verify specific claims. Descriptions of child abductors vary widely, ranging from angels and witches to ghostly figures, and even biker-like men, lone biker of the apocalypse, challenging strict extraterrestrial hypothesis interpretations. For example, some children report being grabbed by figures resembling the Pied Piper, a figure from older folk traditions. These narratives suggest multiple phenomena or one phenomena manifesting in various culturally shaped forms and formats. Ultimately, whether paranormal child abductions stem from extraterrestrials, fairies, or an entirely unknown source, the similarities across time and culture reveal deep-rooted patterns. And rather than dismissing these encounters, the focus should be on understanding the shared motifs and what they may signify. So, in a historical context, contrary to popular belief, alien abduction stories did not start with the famous 1961 Betty and Barney Hill case. Earlier contactees had mostly voluntary, pleasant-ish encounters. No, a lot of the early contactees, they were super into it. Some were involuntary, and the unpleasant abductions would come later. Betty and Barney Hill's case was one of the first abductions investigated using hypnotic regression, but even then, some professionals consider the memories shared delusions. The 1980s saw a surge in reports of child abductions, largely fueled by the work of Bud Hopkins, and I'm going to throw Whitley Strieber's name in that hat as well, who popularized hypnotic regression. Not Whitley Strieber, Bud Hopkins. And the concept of abductions beginning in childhood and continuing throughout life. That's where this concept first shows up in the work of Bud Hopkins. Abductions often start in early childhood, according to this model. sometimes as young as infancy and continuing sporadically into adulthood. I would say that the only way, and this is a big if, the only way that you're going to remember much of anything that happened to you as an infant would have to be through some kind of hypnosis, I would say. And that's, once again, very iffy, slippery slope, precarious precipice. Victims describe paralysis, being levitated aboard crafts or into crafts or above tables, medical-like examinations involving probes, implants, sometimes the implants themselves. The abductee is often described as a tagged animal, monitored over a lifetime. There are parallels drawn to fairy lore, once again with changelings, abductions, and long-term captivity by otherworldly beings. Hypnosis often reveals repressed or subconscious memories, though interpretations of these can be controversial. There's notable patterns, though. Implants inserted into abductees' bodies, especially children, became a popular motif in ufology in the 1980s. Many abductees recount encounters with greys. Abductions sometimes include teleportation, loss of time, medical probes, and psychological manipulation. I think it would be belaboring the obvious to point out the physiological similarities between greys and elves and fairies before their Disneyfication into what we tend to picture mentally today. The much older pre-Disneyfication images of fairies and elves are disturbingly in line with gray aliens, or the tall whites, if you will. Abduction sometimes includes teleportation, loss of time, medical probes, and psychological manipulation. Memories can be fragmented, enhanced by hypnosis, sometimes recovered even decades after the event. Let's look at a few select cases. September 1965 in Litchfield, New Hampshire, a 7-year-old girl and her siblings awoke to a red mist. She recalls seeing a gray's eyes being levitated onto a craft for an invasive medical exam. And this is another reoccurring theme. You don't see it so much with fairies, not that I've seen any of the folklore literature, but the eyes of the gray alien. Something about them, just the eyes themselves, possess some kind of creepy, primordial, archetypal power. It's strange. Prospera Munoz from Spain, circa 1945. Hypnosis revealed abduction by two entities in a gynecological exam aboard a silver craft. Then there's the tale of Sandy Nichols from Nashville, Tennessee. She was first abducted at age 5, had repeated abductions involving strange quote-unquote toys and increasingly invasive experiences. A man by the name of Kyle Lund from Montana in 1964. Young boy vanishes for hours, communicates with an unpronounceable being near the family barn, speaking in strange tongues, etc. Nottinghamshire, UK, 1967. A 7-year-old reports levitation and strange creatures. There's a pair of Canadian brothers who in 1979 witnessed a disc hovering, and the youngest one was abducted. He later shown signs of seizures that weren't there before. There's a man by the name of Colin from America, 1992. 2-year-old tells a story of a scary owl-like being and dark spaceships. There's Sam, also from America, who in the 1990s under hypnosis recalls being levitated and examined with invasive procedures. There's a pair of Chilean boys who in 1994 were abducted for 72 hours by a quote-unquote silver-haired god, subjected to strange examinations. It's probably Ashtar Sharan, one of his assholes. Voronezh, Russia, 1989. Witnesses see 3-eyed beings and a boy is paralyzed and abducted temporarily. San Francisco de Chuchu in Chile. That's the name. I didn't make it up. Multiple witnesses see a craft abduct a custodian and a child who are found dazed nearby. There's cultural and folklore parallels. The narrative of lifelong abduction mirrors fairy lore. Children taken by supernatural beings and returned or replaced. Screaming mothers and lost children echo the, even to today, modern folktale of La Llorona, the Banshee legends, changeling myths. The concept of implants recalls older myths of physical marks or injuries from fairy abductions, aka witch marks. children's unique role in UFO and fairy encounters is very strange. Both UFO phenomena and fairy lore show a marked obsession or focus on children, or, if not children, reproduction. Children, especially age 7 to early teens, are considered at peak sensory and psychic sensitivity, making them more likely to be witnesses or victims. This is before capacity for abstract thought is almost entirely extinguished. Things in the thought process of children this young aren't quite as concrete as they are to grown-ups. I guess the best way to put it, using modern parlance, would be a greater degree of neuroplasticity. Notable examples include the 1994 aerial school sightings in Zimbabwe, where dozens of children saw UFOs and humanoid beings that delivered telepathic environmental messages. And there's that environmental thing again. This is why I'm starting to think that, well, we'll get into it. Child abductees reportedly behave differently than adults, more often largely more aware, less traumatized, sometimes treated quote-unquote kindly by abductors, resembling fairy abduction patterns once again. Alien abductions tend to occur from about age 6 or 7 up through early adulthood, roughly at 21 years old. I also find it odd that roughly 21 years old is the age wherein schizophrenia starts to set in. I'm not quite sure of what all these connections mean. It's probably something to do with brain chemistry. I mean, obviously it's something to do with brain chemistry, but as far as how this fits into the UFO slash fairy lore abduction narrative, but it basically tends to taper off sharply in older adults. Fairy abductions mostly target children up to 14 years old. Both phenomena respect a roughly 14-year window corresponding to societal and biological markers of adulthood and psychic ability. Ew. That's another avenue I'm not anxious to explore. I'm not touching that one. Older individuals are often dismissed or ignored by abductors or fairies, as shown in both folklore and modern abduction reports. I've heard of cases from South America where there's been old men approached by aliens or nearly abducted by aliens, but they were like, too old, meh. So they just wouldn't go through with it. Lucky for the old man in question, I suppose. Children may enter trance-like or dissociative states after encounters. There's a story of the Hess family whose child would just spin like a top. Just enter some weird trance-like state and just spin like a whirling dervish, like a Sufi mystic. Children often develop heightened fears of the dark, fear of being watched, fear of being alone. I mean, these are pretty common childhood fears, but these are greatly augmented, allegedly, in children who've undergone some kind of abduction experience. Research suggests that children experience less physical paralysis during abduction, according to the comparative literature. They retain greater awareness, sometimes willingly cooperate. Some researchers argue that children's testimony is far more reliable than that of adults, and often more spontaneous and less influenced by cultural contamination. No preconceived notions. I think that's another reason why they may be targeted as much, or more so than adults. Others warn about children's vivid imaginations and susceptibility to dissociative hysteria under stress, which can mimic abduction symptoms. The concept of false memory syndrome, quote-unquote, or FMS, emerging from the 1980s to 1990s largely satanic panic milieu, debates around recovered memories of abuse, complicates interpretation. Some alien abduction memories may mask real traumatic abuse or be constructed by therapists or cultural influence. Too many goddamn video games and MTV. FMS explains many recovered memories under hypnosis, but cannot fully account for recent spontaneous child recollections of abduction. Abductees often report multiple encounters over years, not just childhood memories. Neurological studies show humans have mechanisms to repress or bury traumatic memories. lending some credibility to the idea of buried or altered recollections. Many abductees with documented abuse can distinguish between the abuse and the abduction memories, and similar repression of memories appears in fairy lore with trance-like states or lost time. The overall implications of all this are that alien abduction stories share thematic and phenomenological traits, fairy abduction folklore, especially regarding children, and the intersection of psychology, cultural narrative, and reported experience creates a complicated and often controversial picture. At the core, each report represents a real human experience that demands empathy and careful consideration. As I've said before, when it comes to potential abductees, the only thing that's real is the trauma. I mean, well, that's not the only thing that's real, but that's what you have in front of you every time. That's the thing that's certain, is the trauma. Children abducted from bedrooms, like traditional fairies who snatch babies from cradles. There's many alien abduction stories that report children taken directly from their beds. From schoolyards, these places can be surprisingly risky, as seen in notable cases like the one from Voronezh, Russia, San Francisco. South American Duende legends, where fae-like beings are said to prowl schools. Once again, the Ariel School incident. The wilderness, which we're going to get into once again, the outdoors, once believed to be the realm of the fairies, out in that nature, in that nurture, remains perilous in many modern accounts. Many abductions happen in forest clearings, fields, or remote rural areas. Several wilderness encounters include David Pelly, 1959, New Jersey. He saw a UFO hovering over a circular clearing, a quote-unquote perfect circle, reminiscent both of UFO landing sites and traditional fairy rings. Crop circles. They're not all made just by two dudes with boards. In fact, some are incredibly mathematically complex, but I'm not going to get deep into the weeds on crop circles. There's a counterintelligence movement to discredit all of them. Anywho, Spokane, Washington, 1974. A witness and a friend encountered a landed craft and gray aliens in a wooded ravine. The site resembled a fairy ring. Time loss followed an examination on a quote-unquote dental chair. I often wondered if there are psychedelic mushrooms growing in crop circles or any other psychedelic plants. Really something I want to look into. Didn't make a note of that. There's a woman named Barbara who in the early 1990s in California, as a 9-year-old, saw a hovering silver object near an abandoned shack. It's a typical fairy haunt: abandoned shacks, abandoned buildings, followed by 3 hours of time. Abandoned empty buildings. More of a modern day phenomenon, but these are also very closely, commonly associated with places that are haunted or where jinn prefer to hang out. Berries, again, and the forest is a liminal space. These encounters often occur near berry bushes, which is a traditional fairy motif. And berry bushes are highly inextricably interlinked with much of the missing 411 phenomena. There's Madeleine Arnoux, who back in Nazi-occupied France gathered wild berries before meeting short beings by a gray motionless object, most likely some form of saucer. She experienced oppressive atmosphere and an inability to move and missing time, which are all classic fairy traits. You have a similar motif in 1964, where 5 boys playing near berry fields in New York encountered a shiny craft and a small humanoid being, again linking fruit and berry gathering with supernatural encounters. And then you have the straight out and out liminality of the wilderness and travel. Wilderness places and journeys historically symbolize spiritual awakening or vulnerability. You know, Jeebus in the desert, Aboriginal walkabout, Spirit Quest, Homer Simpson ate the ghost pepper, or the crazy Quetzalcoatl insanity pepper, things of this nature. Fairy hills and sites like Wiltshire's Silbury Hill is known as a gateway to fairyland, and these are hotbeds for anomalous lights and abductions. Anomalous lights, spook lights, will-o'-the-wisps. This is a big one. Very much incorporates or carries over from fairy lore into UFO lore. There's a 1994 encounter that involved tetrahedrons with small figures near Silbury Hill, followed by missing time and nightmares. Again, blending fairy lore with UFO phenomena. And then travelers in liminal states or in between places are especially prone to abduction or supernatural interactions. Both fairies and aliens target those in transit, including people in cars. How many abduction stories have you heard where someone's just driving along the highways, minding their own, and the radio starts going wacky, etc.? It kind of all cascades from there. I'm sure you've heard it a million times. Children taken from cars. Parapsychologists observe poltergeist phenomena often involving children at puberty or approaching puberty. Similarly, alien encounters with low-level objects near vehicles often include children or school teachers. Several detailed cases include 1969 in Utah. A family was lifted into a circular white room aboard a craft, examined, and followed by a UFO. Another recurring thing with these abductions, at least in the alien and UFO folklore, is a white room. It seems to have no dimensions. It's just blank, infinite white as far as you can tell. The depth perception is gone. It's thrown off, and it seems to be lit up, but by no particular lights anywhere. Strange. 1972, Idaho. A 12-year-old abductee experienced 6 hours aboard a craft during a car trip, completely unnoticed by the family. That sounds like a nightmare. It's bad enough taking a family road trip, but to have your consciousness split between I don't know, I guess just an out-of-body experience where your body's in the car, or I don't know how that works, but it sounds doubly nightmarish. 1980, Texas. A mother and toddler were abducted during a car ride. There were probes inserted, missing time, and afterward, healing occurred, reminiscent of fairy changeling lore, where children were taken and sometimes returned healed or altered. There's thematic overlaps and speculations. The repeated presence of missing time, liminal spaces, berry patches, circular clearings or fairy rings, and multi-generational abductions, which draws strong parallels between fairy folklore and modern alien abductions. Taking multiple generations, mothers and children, and it's always down the mother lineage, which I believe has some kind of religious significance I don't know. Mothers and children, the matrilineal genetic generations, which might serve a purpose paralleling fairy behavior. I don't know. I think I've seen this in certain fictions before too. Maybe I'm thinking of Dune or something. But both fairies and aliens operate in ways that disrupt normal perceptions of time and space, often targeting vulnerable children in transitional settings. Alien abduction narratives mirror older fairy traditions, particularly the targeting of children in vulnerable liminal locations such as bedrooms, schoolyards, wilderness clearings, cars. The consistent presence of natural features like berry bushes and fairy rings, the phenomena of missing time, and multi-generational abduction suggest a continuity or reinterpretation of ancient folklore in contemporary experience. The wilderness remains a key liminal space where spiritual, paranormal, and extraterrestrial encounters converge, blurring the line between not just fairy myth and alien reality, but cryptids, once again, Sasquatch, as mentioned before, and I'm coming closer and closer to the idea of just animism, spirits of place, the genius loci, Shinto kami, elementals. It's the place, maybe. Ritual landscapes, megaliths, ley lines, anomalous energy plots. I don't know. It all kind of connects, but in a way it doesn't. I'm not sure. Another reoccurring, very strange theme. This goes into some strange places. It's the use of lures, decoys, and imposter entities. The unsettling use of lures, especially voices and the act of play, to attract children by both fairies in folklore and alleged extraterrestrials in modern abduction narratives, are another reoccurring theme throughout the abduction lore. The parallels highlight a continuity of methods used to entice children into otherworldly encounters. Some certain specific examples include a van with candy. No, just kidding. Voices calling names. Both fairies and aliens frequently call children by name to draw them closer. There's also similar reports of so-called skinwalkers and or Wendigo utilizing this tactic. So we're breaking into cryptid and supernatural folklore as well on that front. Virginia Horton hears a who. No, a whisper. That's who. Calling her name in her head, a memory dating back to childhood. A man by the name of Brett Oldham recalls a voice inviting him aboard a craft with assurances of friendship and no harm. Children hear sounds of other children playing. In Puerto Rico in 1984, a girl hears children playing near short grays who summon a glowing sphere, presumably a ship. Adults also sometimes hear similar playful giggling sounds associated with UFOs, such as a couple in Davis, California, hearing children's laughter as a craft buzzed their car. Aliens, like fairies, present playmates or toys to entice children. One abductee that Bud Hopkins studied described a screen memory of an imaginary dog taking him to off-limits places, similar to fairy dogs luring children in Irish folklore. In Norway, in 1985, doll-sized entities played hide-and-seek with village children for hours. I believe adults saw these doll-sized toy people as well. I could be wrong on that. I'd have to double check. Two boys in Salem, Oregon recalled playing with strange bald kids before UFO sightings and missing time. The Hopkinsville, Kentucky goblin encounter, not the one in the 60s, but the man who allegedly bought the property in the 2010s. He had children, and apparently these things were coming back and were traced to a cave. You'd have to watch Hellier for the whole story. I don't remember all of it, but his own children kept talking about the bald kids playing in the yard at night. Very strange. There's also a gentleman introduced in a documentary on reptilians, the name of which, oddly enough, is Reptilians, who, apart from being one of the few, if not the only person to suggest that not all reptilians are bad, who recalls an anecdote from his childhood of specifically being abducted or taken out of time, so to speak. He makes it sound like this all occurs in his room, but outside of time somehow, to where the rest of the world isn't happening. It's just him, reptilian child, that he is basically instructed to introduce the concept of play to. They're roughly the same age, and he's commanded by an older reptilian to play with the reptilian kid. Play date from another dimension. Very weird. There's a woman named Sharon, who's an Australian nurse and an abductee, and under hypnosis recalled being taken to an artificial playground enclosed in an orange globe of light designed to make children feel at home. About 50 children were held there before being examined by reptilian beings under gray supervision. That's a reversal, showing an elaborate ruse combining play and captivity. Very insidious, very strange and sinister. The lure of play is deeply effective as a method because children naturally seek fun and social connection. A 2004 study found that 65% of children have imaginary playmates by age 7, which coincides with the typical age of first abduction reports. Are these imaginary friends? Who knows? This suggests that abductors, whether literal or symbolic, exploit a child's developmental stage and imaginative nature. There is a striking resemblance between ancient fairy lores and modern alien abduction tactics. Both use voices calling by name, sounds of play, invitation to join in the fun and games, and the offering of companionship or toys to attract children. These methods prey on children's natural curiosity, trust, and desire for play, often leading to mysterious disappearances, missing time, or traumatic experiences. Elaborate deceptions, such as artificial playgrounds, further suggest abductors craft environments to manipulate children's perceptions, blending care with captivity. This pattern is both psychologically fascinating and chilling, pointing to a long-standing archetype of using childlike play as a gateway to the unknown. I'm going to have to split this into 2 parts. It's too much. All the stuff I said that I get to, like magical fetus spells or Bigfoot abductions, they're coming in part 2. This is my first attempt at really serious research of the paranormal / ufological nature. I just want to say Joshua Cutchin did most of the work, but I'm just adding to it basically. But I had a lot of fun putting this together. I just split this apart. I'll probably put both episodes out on the same day. And yeah, I hope you have fun listening to it. I don't know, maybe you learned something or hear something new that you didn't hear before, hadn't heard before. Yeah, man. Team Crow, man. I don't know. This is the first obsessive thing I've ever done. Promise. Yeah, hope you liked it. My name is Mike. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Supernatural Child Abductions, Part 1. Part 2 should probably be coming out, like I said, the same day. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah. Appreciate you guys coming around. I appreciate the subs and the likes and the comments and the subscribes and all that, man. You guys are awesome. Appreciate you. See you on the next one.
Booyakasha.